The morning I retired from my family, I left 6 house keys on my kitchen table. One belonged to my daughter, Rebecca. One opened my son Michael's garage office. Another was for Lauren's apartment. The others belonged to people who had spent years telling me I was the heart of the family, while quietly treating me like unpaid staff. At 64, I had become the babysitter, the bookkeeper, the cook, the driver, and the emergency contact for everyone except myself. So before sunrise, I turned off my phone, locked my front door, and walked away without warning. By noon, my family thought I had disappeared. By evening, they realized their free labor had finally retired. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, I'd love to hear your story. Please like and subscribe if this journey speaks to you. Leave a comment and tell me how you would have handled this situation. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world tonight, share your location and the current time where you are. Sometimes, knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. When my husband Thomas died, people kept telling me how lucky I was to have such a close family. You won't be alone, Angelina. Your children will take care of you. At least you have family nearby. For a while, I believed every one of those words. Thomas and I had been married for 41 years. He was the quiet kind of man who fixed broken cabinet doors, folded laundry without being asked, and never left the house without kissing me goodbye. We built our life in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, where we raised our 3 children, Rebecca, Michael, and Lauren. Our house was never fancy. The furniture was old. The kitchen cabinets needed repainting. But Thomas always said that a home was measured by the people inside it. When he passed away from a heart attack at 68, the house suddenly became too quiet. For weeks, I slept on only one side of the bed. I still cooked enough food for 2 people. Sometimes I heard his footsteps in the hallway and turned around before remembering that he was gone. My children came often during those first months. Rebecca brought casseroles. Michael mowed the lawn. Lauren sat beside me on the porch and cried. I remember thinking how grateful I was. I thought Thomas had left me surrounded by love. But grief changes families, and sometimes it reveals things that were already there. Rebecca was the first one who needed help. She had 2 children, Emily and Noah, and worked full-time at a medical office. One afternoon, she called me. Mom, would you mind picking up Emily from school? I got stuck at work. Of course, I said yes. A week later, she needed me to pick up both children. Then she asked if I could keep them until dinner. Then it became every Tuesday, then every Tuesday and Thursday. Within 6 months, I had a permanent car seat in my vehicle. I never complained because I loved my grandchildren. Their laughter filled the silence in my house. Meanwhile, Michael had his own struggles. His repair garage had grown quickly after Thomas died. One evening, he sat across from me at my kitchen table. Mom, Dad always handled paperwork. I'm drowning here. Before retirement, I had worked part-time in bookkeeping. Just help me organize some invoices, he said. I spent 3 hours that night sorting receipts. The next week, he brought 2 boxes, then tax records, then payroll information. Eventually, I had my own desk inside Michael's office. The employees assumed I worked there. No one asked whether I wanted to. Lauren, my youngest, had always been the free spirit of the family. She changed jobs frequently, moved apartments twice in 3 years, and often struggled financially. Mom, can I borrow a little money until payday? Mom, my car payment is late. Mom, could I stay for dinner? She always promised to repay me. She rarely did. At first, none of this bothered me. In fact, it gave me purpose. I woke up every morning with somewhere to go. Someone needed me. Someone depended on me. After losing Thomas, that feeling seemed important. But slowly, something changed. The requests stopped sounding like requests. Rebecca no longer asked if I was available. She texted, "Need you to get the kids at 3. Michael stopped saying thank you. Instead, he said things like, "The payroll needs to be done. Can you handle this tomorrow? I'll drop the paperwork off." Lauren would enter my house without knocking. Sometimes she opened my refrigerator before saying hello. Once she walked in carrying laundry. "Mom, my dryer broke again." I folded her clothes that afternoon while she watched television. I wish I could say I noticed the change immediately. I didn't. Mothers are experts at making excuses. Rebecca is stressed. Michael works hard. Lauren is struggling. I repeated those thoughts like prayers. But there were little moments, tiny moments that stayed with me. One afternoon, I attended Emily's school concert. Afterward, another grandmother smiled at me. "You must babysit a lot." Before I could answer, Emily laughed. "Grandma always does everything. She doesn't really have anything else to do." She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was 16. She was simply repeating what she heard. The words settled inside my chest. She doesn't really have anything else to do. Was that who I had become? A woman without a life. A woman who existed only when someone needed something. The following Christmas, I cooked the entire holiday dinner. 22 people sat around my dining table. I bought the groceries. I baked the pies. I cleaned the house. After dinner, everyone moved into the living room. The men watched football. The children played games. Rebecca sat on the couch. Lauren scrolled through her phone. Michael talked business. I stood alone in the kitchen, washing dishes. My hands were submerged in warm water when I suddenly realized that nobody had even asked me to sit down. Nobody had noticed that I never sat down at all. Thomas would have noticed. He always noticed. That night, after everyone left, I stood in the empty kitchen. The dishwasher hummed. The clock above the stove ticked. The house was quiet again. I looked at the stack of serving bowls, the dirty towels, and the crumbs scattered across the table. And for the first time, I asked myself a question that frightened me. Who takes care of Angelina? The answer was simple. Nobody. Several days later, Rebecca called. "Mom, can you watch the kids Saturday?" Michael texted. "Need you at the garage Monday." Lauren sent a message. "Can I borrow $200? I sat in my recliner holding my phone. The television played softly in the background. Outside, snow was beginning to fall. For the first time since Thomas died, I didn't immediately answer. I looked at the empty chair beside me. The chair that had belonged to my husband. Sometimes, when life became complicated, Thomas used to squeeze my hand and say, "Angelina, people will keep taking until someone teaches them where the limit is." At the time, I thought he was talking about strangers. I never imagined he might have meant our own family. That night, I finally replied to my children. "I'll let you know." 3 simple words, nothing more. Yet something shifted inside me. I didn't understand it then. But looking back, I think that was the moment my retirement truly began. Not the morning I left the keys on the table. Not the day I turned off my phone. Not the day I walked away. It began the first time I realized that my family needed me far more than they loved me, and that realization frightened me more than being alone ever could. The first time I realized that I had become a full-time employee in my own family, I was standing in my bathroom at 5:30 in the morning. Outside my bedroom window, the sun had not even risen. I had already packed Emily's lunch, placed Noah's soccer bag by the front door, started a load of laundry, and prepared the paperwork Michael needed for his garage. My coffee sat untouched on the kitchen counter. And somehow, before 6 o'clock in the morning, I was already running late. Late for what? For my own life. Rebecca had developed a routine. Every weekday at 7:15, she pulled into my driveway and the children climbed out before her vehicle had fully stopped. Sometimes she rolled down her window. "Thanks, Mom." Sometimes she simply waved. And occasionally she was already driving away before I reached the front door. Emily and Noah would spend the afternoon at my house until Rebecca finished work. I cooked dinner for them. I helped with homework. I attended school events. I drove them to activities. One afternoon, Noah asked me if I worked at his school. "No, sweetheart." "Then why are you always here?" The question made me smile at first, but later that night I sat alone in my kitchen and wondered the same thing. Why was I always everywhere for everyone else? Michael's garage became another responsibility. His business had grown quickly, and he often told people that he could not have done it without me. At first, those words made me proud, but eventually I realized he said them only when other people were listening. When we were alone, things sounded different. "Mom, these invoices need to be finished." "Mom, you're behind on payroll." "Mom, I need those tax files organized." There was no please. There was rarely a thank you. One afternoon, I arrived at the garage after spending the morning with my grandchildren. Michael was speaking with one of his mechanics. He pointed toward me. "She'll handle it." The mechanic smiled. "Your office manager?" Michael laughed. "No, that's my mom." The man looked embarrassed. I smiled politely, but as I carried the boxes into the office, one thought echoed inside my mind. Office manager. That was exactly what I had become. Except office managers get paid. I did not. Lauren brought a different kind of exhaustion. She was charming, emotional, and unpredictable. She always had a crisis. Her landlord increased the rent. Her car needed repairs. Her dog was sick. Her credit card was overdue. And somehow, every problem eventually arrived at my front door. One Saturday afternoon, she appeared carrying 3 laundry baskets. My washing machine stopped again. I was baking cookies with Emily. "Could it wait until tomorrow?" I asked. Lauren frowned. "Mom, I really need help." The disappointment in her voice made me feel guilty. So I washed her clothes, folded them, packed them, and by the time she left, my entire Saturday had disappeared. That evening, I sat in my recliner with aching feet. The television played softly. No one had asked how my day had been. No one had noticed that I looked exhausted. My doctor had recently told me to reduce stress. My blood pressure had increased. I was having trouble sleeping. Sometimes I forgot small things. The doctor asked me an important question. "Are you taking time for yourself?" I laughed. "I have grandchildren." He smiled politely. "No, Angelina. I mean for yourself." I did not know how to answer. The truth was painful. I had stopped existing as an individual. I was only useful when someone needed something. A few weeks later, Rebecca called while I was grocery shopping. "Can you pick up Noah? I have a meeting." "I have a doctor's appointment." There was silence. Then she sighed. "Can't you reschedule it?" I stood in the cereal aisle holding my phone. My doctor's appointment had taken 3 weeks to schedule, yet somehow it seemed less important than her meeting. "I suppose I can." "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver." A lifesaver. Everyone said that, but nobody asked whether the lifesaver was drowning. Michael created a schedule for the garage. He wrote my name beside certain tasks. Payroll, invoices, insurance, customer calls. I stared at the whiteboard. "You made me a schedule." He looked confused. "So you know what needs to be done." "I never agreed to work here." He laughed. Mom, you're helping family. Family. That word became the answer to everything. Why couldn't I travel, family? Why couldn't I rest, family? Why couldn't I say no, family? One Friday afternoon, I received 3 phone calls within 20 minutes. Rebecca needed childcare. Michael needed payroll completed. Lauren needed money. I sat inside my car in a grocery store parking lot and began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears. I suddenly felt 64 years old. I had buried my husband. I had survived grief. And now I spent every day making sure grown adults could function. That evening, I visited the cemetery where Thomas was buried. I brought fresh flowers. The grass had recently been cut. The wind moved softly through the trees. I sat beside his headstone. I don't know what happened, I whispered. For several minutes, I simply sat there. I remembered all the evenings Thomas and I spent planning retirement, traveling, fishing trips, weekend drives, painting classes, small adventures. We had worked our entire lives. We had earned rest. But Thomas was gone. And somehow I had inherited everyone else's responsibilities. As I stood to leave, I remembered something he once said. Angelina, one day you'll need to protect your own peace. At the time, I thought peace meant quiet. Now I realized peace meant boundaries. A few days later, Rebecca came over with the children. She was rushing toward the door. Emily looked up at her mother. Are you staying for dinner? Rebecca laughed. No, Grandma's got everything covered. Everything covered. Those words stayed with me because they were true. I had everything covered. The children, the finances, the meals, the schedules, the emergencies, the errands. Everyone's lives worked because I made them work. And somewhere during those years, I had disappeared. One Sunday afternoon, Emily sat beside me while I folded laundry. She looked at me thoughtfully. Grandma. Yes, sweetheart. What do you do for fun? I stopped folding a towel. The answer should have been easy. Reading, painting, traveling, gardening, anything. Instead, I sat there in silence. Emily looked worried. Grandma, I forced a smile. I used to paint. When? I honestly could not remember. That frightened me. Not because I had forgotten painting, because I had forgotten myself. That night, after everyone went home, I stood alone in my kitchen. The dishwasher hummed. Laundry waited in the dryer. Michael's paperwork sat on the counter. Lauren's unpaid loan note rested beside the phone. Rebecca had already texted me tomorrow's schedule. For the first time in years, I did not answer anyone. I turned off the kitchen light, walked upstairs, and sat beside Thomas's empty side of the bed. In the darkness, I finally admitted something I had been avoiding for a very long time. I was not being appreciated. I was being expected. And expectations can become chains long before anyone notices they're wearing them. The first time I started saving text messages, I felt ridiculous. Mothers are not supposed to collect evidence against their own children. At least that was what I told myself. But something inside me had changed after that conversation with Emily. Her innocent question about what I did for fun had stayed with me for days. I could not stop thinking about the silence that followed. I truly could not remember the last time I had done something simply because Angelina wanted to do it. Every hour of every day belonged to someone else. And slowly, without even realizing it, I began paying attention. One Monday morning, I received a call from Noah's school. Mrs. Hayes, your grandson isn't feeling well. I was confused. Why are you calling me? You are listed as the primary emergency contact. Primary, not secondary, not backup, primary. I picked Noah up because he was sick, but afterward I called Rebecca. Why am I the primary contact? She sounded surprised by the question. Because you're always available. I sat quietly. You never asked me. There was a pause. Mom, I didn't think it mattered. But it did matter. Because suddenly, I realized that my availability had become public property. The following week, the pediatric dentist called. Then the soccer coach. Then Emily's school counselor. My name was listed everywhere. Every emergency, every appointment, every problem. I wasn't simply helping anymore. I had been assigned responsibilities without permission. A few days later, I stopped by Michael's garage. His receptionist handed me several envelopes. Your mail. My mail. Michael said all the business forms go to your house. I looked at the return addresses, insurance documents, tax information, supplier contracts, customer complaints, all addressed to my home. That evening, I asked Michael why. It keeps things organized. Without asking me, he shrugged. You always handle the paperwork. Again, there was that word, always. People become dangerous when they begin using the word always, because always means permanent, always means expected, always means they no longer see your sacrifice. They see your obligation. I began noticing dozens of small things. Rebecca kept a spare key to my house. Lauren had another. Michael had one too. Sometimes they entered without knocking. One afternoon, I returned from the grocery store and found Lauren sitting in my kitchen. She was drinking coffee. Her dog was sleeping on my couch. I hadn't known she was coming. You startled me, she laughed. I used my key. I set the grocery bags down. Why are you here? I needed somewhere quiet to work. I wanted to ask why she had not called, why she assumed my house belonged to everyone. But I stayed silent. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table. The room felt different. It no longer felt entirely mine. I opened a drawer and found several unpaid utility bills that Lauren had left behind. Beside them was Michael's payroll paperwork. Rebecca's school forms sat nearby. My own mail was buried underneath theirs. Suddenly, the image seemed almost symbolic. My life hidden beneath everyone else's needs. That evening, I purchased a small notebook. Blue cover, spiral binding. Nothing special. I wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then I wrote school pickup 1.5 hours. Garage paperwork 3 hours. Lauren errands 2 hours. Cooking 1 hour. Cleaning 45 minutes. At first, I felt ashamed. Why was I counting? Why was I keeping records? But another voice inside me answered. Because nobody else does. The notebook slowly filled. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, hours, tasks, appointments, errands, babysitting, cleaning, financial help. Sometimes I looked at the numbers and could hardly believe them. I was working 30 or 40 hours every week. Unpaid, unacknowledged, invisible. One evening, Lauren arrived crying. Her credit card payment was overdue. Her car insurance had increased. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. I just need $500. I hesitated. She immediately became emotional. Mom, I wouldn't ask if I had another option. I wrote the check. After she left, I placed the amount in my notebook. For the first time. $500. Date. Purpose. No anger. Just facts. 2 weeks later, She asked for another loan, and then another. I wrote those down too. Rebecca had developed a habit of texting instead of asking. Monday, need you Wednesday. Tuesday. Can you take Noah? Thursday, Friday. Kids staying overnight Saturday. There were no question marks, no room for refusal. One afternoon I replied, I already have plans. Rebecca called immediately. What plans? The question caught me off guard, because it wasn't curiosity, it was disbelief, as if the existence of my own plans required explanation. I have lunch with a friend, she sighed. Can you change it? There it was again, the assumption. My schedule existed only until someone else's became inconvenient. I kept that text message. I don't know why. Perhaps because I needed proof. Not for anyone else, for myself. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. One Sunday after church, I met an old friend named Patricia. We had not seen each other for years. She looked rested, happy. She had recently retired. What are you doing with all your free time? She asked. I laughed. I don't have free time. She smiled politely. No grandchildren? 2. She nodded. How often do you babysit? Most days. Her expression changed. And your children? They work. Patricia stirred her coffee. You know, helping isn't the same as raising another generation. I didn't answer, because the truth hurt. For years I had convinced myself that I was being generous. But perhaps I had also been afraid. Afraid that if I stopped helping, I would stop mattering. Afraid that people only needed me because I was useful. The notebook continued filling. Then one afternoon, something happened that truly frightened me. Emily was sitting in the kitchen doing homework. Rebecca had not arrived yet. The clock read 6:30, then 7, then 7:30. I finally called her. Oh my gosh, I forgot to text you. Forgot. Emily had been with me for 9 hours. No apology, no concern. Only inconvenience. After hanging up, Emily quietly asked, Grandma, do you ever get tired? I looked at her, really looked at her. She was almost an adult now, old enough to understand. Yes, I said. I think you do too much. Her words landed heavily. Because children often tell the truth, adults avoid. That night, after everyone left, I opened my notebook. Page after page. Hours, money, responsibilities, favors, expectations. I realized something important. I wasn't collecting evidence against my children. I was collecting evidence against my own denial. For years, I had ignored the imbalance because I wanted peace. But peace built on silence eventually becomes resentment. I placed the notebook inside my bedside drawer. Next to it, I began keeping important documents, bank statements, loan amounts, receipts, text messages, insurance forms, copies of paperwork. I still didn't know what I was preparing for. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't planning a fight. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice had started whispering, One day, you may need to remember exactly how this happened. And for the first time in my life, I decided to listen. The Sunday dinner that changed everything began like every other Sunday dinner. I woke up before sunrise. The grocery store opened at 7. By 7:30, I had already purchased chicken vegetables, potatoes, fresh bread, ingredients for 2 pies, and enough food to feed 11 people. Rebecca had requested her favorite casserole. Michael wanted roast chicken. Lauren asked if I could make the lemon pie she liked. No one asked what I wanted. That fact did not occur to me until much later. By 10 o'clock, my kitchen was already warm from the oven. The dishwasher was running. The dining room table was set. I moved carefully through the house, carrying dishes, folding napkins, arranging flowers from my garden. Thomas used to help with these dinners. He would peel potatoes while telling jokes. He always set the table. He always made certain I sat down before everyone else. Without him, I had simply continued doing both jobs. Around noon, Rebecca arrived with Emily and Noah. She stepped inside carrying nothing except her purse. "The kids are starving." Michael arrived 20 minutes later. He brought his appetite and several complaints about work. Lauren appeared just before dinner. She had forgotten to buy drinks. Again. Nobody noticed the hours I had already spent preparing everything. Nobody asked whether I needed help. That had become normal. As everyone settled into the living room, I stood in the kitchen finishing the gravy. I could hear laughter, television, conversations, the sound of family. Yet somehow, I felt separated from it, like an employee working during someone else's gathering. Rebecca walked into the kitchen first. "Mom, can you watch the kids Friday? Mark and I have dinner plans." Before I answered, Michael spoke from the doorway. "I'll need you Monday morning too. Payroll is a mess." Lauren sat at the counter. "Oh, and I need you to keep Daisy next weekend." 3 requests, less than 60 seconds. Not one question about how I was doing. Not one moment to consider whether I had plans. Rebecca opened the refrigerator. "We're also out of milk." I looked at her. At 42 years old, my daughter was standing in my kitchen telling me we needed milk. For some reason, I suddenly felt very tired. Dinner began. Everyone talked over one another. Michael complained about employees. Rebecca discussed school schedules. Lauren talked about her landlord. The grandchildren laughed. I passed plates, refilled drinks, brought extra bread, carried dishes. Nobody noticed that I never sat down for more than a few minutes. Halfway through dinner, Michael looked at his phone. "Mom, I need those invoices tomorrow." Rebecca nodded. "And Friday, remember the kids?" Lauren smiled. "And Daisy?" Something inside me tightened. For years, I had listened quietly. For years, I had smiled. But that evening, the words felt heavier, as if every request from the past several years had suddenly gathered at the same table. Then Rebecca laughed. The sentence that changed everything came so casually that at first I almost missed it. "Mom, you're retired anyway." Everyone chuckled, not cruelly, not intentionally, just casually, as though it were obvious, as though my life had ended the day I stopped receiving a paycheck. Michael nodded. "Yeah, you've got more free time than the rest of us." Lauren smiled. "We don't know what we'd do without you." I looked around the table, my children, my family, the people I loved more than anyone in the world. And suddenly, I realized something terrible. None of them saw me. They saw what I did. They saw what I provided. They saw the services, the childcare, the bookkeeping, the cooking, the cleaning. But Angelina Hayes had disappeared. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Perhaps they noticed my silence. Perhaps they simply waited for me to agree. Instead, I placed my fork on my plate. I looked directly at Rebecca. "If I'm retired," I said quietly, "why am I working for all of you?" The room became completely still. Emily looked down. Noah stopped eating. Michael frowned. Rebecca blinked. Lauren laughed nervously. "Oh, Mom, you know what I mean." "No," I said gently. "I don't think I do." Nobody had ever heard me speak that way. Not angry, not emotional, simply honest. Michael leaned back. We all help each other. I nodded. How do you help me? No one answered. The silence stretched across the table. Rebecca finally spoke. We come over. I looked at her. To eat. Michael said, I fix things around the house. When was the last time? He did not answer. Lauren crossed her arms. Are you upset about something? That question almost made me laugh. Upset about something, as though the issue had appeared that evening, as though years had not passed. I took a deep breath. I haven't had a free weekend in years. Nobody spoke. I can't remember the last time someone asked if I was tired. Rebecca looked uncomfortable. Mom, if this is about helping with the kids... It isn't just the kids, Michael interrupted. We never forced you. The words hurt more than I expected, because, technically, he was right. No one had forced me. I had simply never believed I was allowed to refuse. I stood and carried my plate into the kitchen. For a moment, nobody followed me. I stood at the sink staring out the window. The evening sun was disappearing. The backyard looked empty. For the first time, I wished Thomas were there. He would have understood. A few minutes later, Emily quietly entered the kitchen. She stood beside me. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart. Are you okay? I smiled softly. I think I'm tired. She nodded. I think so too. Those simple words nearly made me cry. Because a 17-year-old girl had noticed what 3 grown children had not. The evening ended awkwardly. Rebecca gathered the children. Michael checked his phone. Lauren avoided eye contact. Nobody mentioned Friday. Nobody mentioned payroll. Nobody mentioned the dog. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca hugged me. You know we appreciate you, right? I wanted to believe her. But appreciation spoken after confrontation feels different. Because true appreciation usually appears before someone loses patience. When the house became quiet again, I sat alone at the dining table. Dirty dishes surrounded me. Leftover food sat on the counter. The same work still waited. Only now, something had changed. For the first time, I had spoken the truth aloud. If I'm retired, why am I working for all of you? I repeated those words several times that night. And the more I thought about them, the more frightening the answer became. Because nobody at that table had actually expected me to stop. In their minds, my work was permanent. My availability was permanent. My sacrifice was permanent. They had built their lives around my labor. And perhaps the most painful realization of all was this. They honestly believed I would continue forever. That night before going to bed, I opened my blue notebook. For the first time, I wrote something other than hours and money. I wrote a single sentence. They think my life belongs to them. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I closed the notebook. Upstairs, beside Thomas's empty side of the bed, I whispered something into the darkness. I think I finally understand. And somewhere deep inside me, something quietly began to wake up. 3 days after that Sunday dinner, I went looking for a flashlight. That simple task changed my life. The power had gone out during a spring storm. Rain struck the windows, and the entire house sat in darkness except for the small battery lantern I kept in the kitchen. Thomas had always stored extra flashlights in his office. Even after 2 years, I rarely entered that room. His desk still stood beside the window. His reading glasses rested exactly where he had left them. The shelves still held his fishing books and old family photographs. Sometimes, Grief freezes a room in time. I opened the bottom drawer, looking for batteries. Instead, I found a large manila envelope. Across the front in Thomas's handwriting were 4 words. For Angelina, when needed. My hands immediately began to shake. I sat down in his chair. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. For several minutes, I simply stared at the envelope. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me felt afraid. Because somehow, I already knew this was not an accident. Thomas had left it for a reason. Inside the envelope was a letter. His handwriting was neat and steady. My dearest Angelina, if you're reading this, then something inside you has finally become too heavy to carry alone. The tears came before I reached the second sentence. I had not seen his handwriting in years. I could almost hear his voice. He wrote about our marriage, about our children, about his regrets. And then I reached the paragraph that changed everything. You love our children more than anyone else. But love and dependence are not the same thing. Sometimes people who love you can still take too much if you never tell them where the line is. I stopped reading. My heart was beating quickly. Thomas had noticed. Perhaps he had noticed long before I did. The letter continued. After my illness, I began worrying that everyone would turn to you for everything. You have spent your entire life taking care of people. I know you, Angelina. You will give until there is nothing left. Tears ran down my face, because every word was true. He understood me better than I understood myself. At the bottom of the letter, he had written something that would stay with me forever. Please remember that your life belongs to you too. I folded the letter carefully, but there was more inside the envelope. Several financial documents, investment statements, insurance information, property papers. I spent nearly an hour reading them. Thomas had established a separate investment account years earlier, an account I had almost forgotten. The value was far larger than I expected. There were also documents confirming that our house belonged entirely to me. Every account, every investment, every property decision. Thomas had intentionally protected me. For years, I had allowed my children to believe I lived only on Social Security and modest savings. I had never corrected them. I lived simply. I did not spend much. I drove an older car. I wore old sweaters. I rarely traveled. Somehow my children had started seeing me as dependent. But I wasn't. Not even close. That realization frightened me. Because if they knew the truth, what would change? Or perhaps a more frightening question. What would remain exactly the same? The next morning, I made coffee and reread the letter. Thomas had included another handwritten note. Talk to Susan. I smiled. Susan Carter, our longtime family attorney. She and Thomas had attended law school together decades earlier. I had not spoken to her since his funeral. That afternoon, I called her office. Angelina. Her voice sounded genuinely warm. We arranged lunch for the following day. Susan looked older than I remembered. Gray hair, reading glasses, the same sharp eyes. After ordering coffee, she studied me carefully. You found the envelope. I blinked. You knew? She nodded. Thomas asked me to keep certain documents ready if you ever needed them. My throat tightened. He thought this might happen. Susan chose her words carefully. He worried that after he passed away, people might depend on you too much. Too much. Such a small phrase, yet it described my life perfectly. I told her everything. The childcare, the garage, the money, the expectations, the Sunday dinner, the sentence Rebecca had spoken. Mom, you're retired anyway. Susan listened quietly. When I finished, she asked one question. When was the last time you did something because Angelina wanted to do it? I stared at my coffee. I don't know. She nodded. That's what Thomas was afraid of. She opened a folder. Inside were copies of legal documents, investment information, property ownership records. Everything had been organized years earlier. Thomas had thought about all of this while he was still alive. The realization broke my heart all over again. He had worried about me, even while he was dying. Before leaving, Susan gave me some advice. You don't have to make any decisions today. I'm not trying to punish my children. I know. I love them. I know that too. She leaned forward. But loving someone doesn't require sacrificing your entire life. Driving home, I thought about those words. I had always treated love as service. Cooking, helping, giving, fixing. What if love also required boundaries? That evening, Michael called. Can you come tomorrow? Payroll is a mess. Normally, I would have said yes immediately. Instead, I said, I can't tomorrow. Silence. What do you mean? I have an appointment. Can you move it? There it was again. The assumption. Everything in my life remained movable except everyone else's. No. He sounded irritated. Fine. I guess I'll figure it out. The conversation ended quickly. For the first time, I felt guilty and relieved at the same time. The following morning, I returned to Thomas's office. I opened his letter again. One sentence stood out. Do not let guilt make decisions for you. I repeated those words several times because guilt had made most of my decisions for years. Guilt after Thomas died. Guilt for saying no. Guilt for wanting time. Guilt for needing rest. Guilt had become the language of my life. Later that afternoon, Lauren arrived unexpectedly. Again. She entered through the kitchen door. Again. She sat down. Again. Mom, can I borrow $600 just temporarily? I looked at her. Really looked at her. 36 years old, healthy, capable, beautiful, and somehow completely certain that her mother would always solve every problem. I need to think about it. She stared at me. What? I said I need to think about it. Lauren laughed awkwardly. Since when? I almost answered. Since your father died? Since I disappeared? Since I stopped existing? But I remained quiet. After she left, I sat in Thomas's office. The rain had stopped. Sunlight entered through the window. I held his letter in my hands. For the first time in years, I no longer felt entirely alone. Because somehow, my husband had reached across death itself to remind me of something I had forgotten. I mattered. Not because I babysat. Not because I cooked. Not because I balanced payroll. Not because I rescued everyone. I mattered because I was Angelina Hayes. And perhaps the saddest realization of all was that Thomas had been gone for 2 years, yet he was still the only person asking whether his wife was okay. That night, before going to bed, I placed the letter inside my nightstand, beside my blue notebook, beside my reading glasses, beside my bed, close enough to touch. And for the first time in a very long time, I fell asleep feeling something I had almost forgotten. Protected. For several days after finding Thomas's letter, I carried his words with me everywhere. Please remember that your life belongs to you too. The sentence followed me while I washed dishes. It sat beside me while I balanced Michael's payroll. It whispered inside my mind while I drove Noah to soccer practice. My life belongs to me. The words felt almost selfish. At 64 years old, I still struggled to believe them. One Tuesday morning, Susan Carter called. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" I stood in my kitchen holding a cup of coffee. "I don't want to hurt my children." Susan was quiet for a moment. Protecting yourself and hurting someone are not the same thing. I looked around the room. Rebecca's school forms sat on the counter. Michael's invoices covered half the table. Lauren's unpaid loan note remained beside the telephone. My own mail sat unopened. Susan spoke again. "Angelina, when was the last time your needs came first?" I couldn't answer, because the answer was probably somewhere in the 1980s. We agreed to meet the following afternoon. Her office was small and warm, filled with law books and framed family photographs. She placed several folders on the table. "These are your financial records." I opened them slowly. Investment accounts, savings, insurance policies, retirement funds, property records. For years, I had acted as though I had very little. Thomas and I had always lived modestly. We saved, we invested, we avoided debt. Yet looking at the documents, I realized something surprising. I was financially secure, more secure than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Susan looked at me carefully. "Your children think you need them." I nodded. "But financially you don't." "No." "Emotionally?" I hesitated. "Maybe." She smiled gently. "That's what we need to work on." Work on. No one had ever spoken about my emotional needs before. The conversation turned practical. Passwords, accounts, emergency contacts, property access, insurance. Susan asked who had access to my finances. I made a list. Rebecca knew several account numbers. Michael had copies of some business records. Lauren used one of my credit cards during emergencies. Susan raised her eyebrows. "Do you trust everyone completely?" I wanted to answer yes. Instead, I said nothing. Because trust had become complicated. Not because my children were evil, because they had stopped seeing boundaries. When the meeting ended, Susan handed me a small notebook. "Make a list." "A list of what?" "Everything that belongs to your life." That evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table. I wrote my house, my savings, my time, my weekends, my health, my privacy, my future, my retirement, my peace. Looking at the words felt strangely powerful, because for years, everything had belonged to everyone else. The next morning, I called the bank. I changed passwords, updated account information, removed old permissions. The young employee helping me asked politely, "Any particular reason?" I smiled. "I'm organizing my retirement." The words surprised me, because I had never truly retired. I had simply changed employers. My new employers happened to be my children. A few days later, I visited a small apartment community near a lake about 40 minutes away. The buildings were quiet. The sidewalks were lined with flowers. Several older women sat outside drinking coffee. One of them waved at me. I had not planned to visit. I had simply seen an advertisement: independent living, active community, no maintenance responsibilities. As I walked beside the lake, something happened that I had not felt in years. Silence. No ringing phone, no schedule, no demands, only wind moving across the water. A woman named Carol introduced herself. "Thinking about moving here," I laughed. "Oh no, I'm just looking." She smiled. Most of us said that. We sat on a bench. She told me about painting classes, book clubs, travel groups, garden projects. I listened quietly. It felt like hearing about another world. a world where women my age lived for themselves. Driving home, I felt guilty. Terribly guilty. How could I even think about leaving? Who would help Rebecca? Who would do Michael's paperwork? What about Lauren? The questions came immediately. But another question followed. What about Angelina? That evening, Michael called. I need you at the garage Saturday. I can't Saturday. What are you doing? I hesitated. I have plans. What plans? Again, the same question, as if my plans required approval. I'm busy. He sounded frustrated. Mom, I really need help. For years, that sentence had controlled me. I really need help. This time, I answered differently. I'm sorry. The silence lasted several seconds. Fine. He hung up. My hands shook afterward. Saying no felt unnatural, like learning to walk again. Friday afternoon, Rebecca stopped by unexpectedly. She placed several school papers on the kitchen counter. Emily has appointments next week. I looked at the papers. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. My name appeared on every form. I pushed them back toward her. You need to update these. She frowned. Why? Because I'm not available every day. She looked genuinely confused. Mom, you've always done it. Always. That word again. I know. Did I do something wrong? The question almost broke my heart. Because Rebecca honestly didn't understand. None of them did. They had lived inside this arrangement for so long that it seemed normal. I just need some time. Time for what? My answer surprised both of us. My own life. She stared at me. I don't think she had ever heard those words from me. When she left, I cried. Not because she had been cruel, because she had been confused. And perhaps confusion hurts more. Because it reveals how invisible you've become. Over the next several weeks, I continued making changes. I collected spare keys. I organized financial documents. I reviewed insurance papers. I stopped immediately responding to every message. Sometimes I waited an hour. Sometimes several. Each delay felt enormous, as if I were committing some terrible offense. One evening, I sat in Thomas's office. His letter rested beside me. The house was quiet. Outside, spring rain tapped softly against the windows. I looked around the room. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine something impossible. A life where I woke up without obligations. A morning that belonged only to me. Coffee by a lake. A painting class. A weekend trip. Silence. Peace. No one asking, no one expecting, no one assigning. The thought frightened me, but it also made me smile. Because perhaps retirement was not about age. Perhaps retirement meant refusing to work jobs you never agreed to accept. A few days later, I returned to the lakeside community. I toured a small apartment, 1 bedroom, large windows, a balcony overlooking the water. The woman showing it to me asked, "When would you want to move?" I looked outside. The sun reflected across the lake. Birds moved over the water. For several seconds, I imagined myself sitting there with a cup of coffee, alone, peaceful, free. And quietly, without fully understanding why, I heard myself answer, "Soon." When I drove home that afternoon, I realized something important. For the first time in years, I had made a plan that belonged only to Angelina Hayes. And perhaps that was the moment my family truly began losing the version of me they had always depended upon. Because while they still believed I would always be there, I had already started learning how to leave. The morning I decided to leave my family began exactly like every other morning. That was the strange part. There was no argument, no screaming, no dramatic confrontation, no final insult. Just another ordinary day in the life of Angelina Hayes. I woke up at 5:30. The house was quiet. Sunlight had not yet reached the windows. For several minutes, I lay in bed, listening to the silence. Thomas's side of the mattress remained untouched beside me. The letter he had written rested in my nightstand. I placed my hand on it before getting up, almost like asking for courage. By 6:30, I had already packed Noah's lunch. Rebecca had dropped the children off early because she had an important meeting. She had texted the night before. "Need you at 7. No question, no apology. Just another assignment." Emily sat quietly at the kitchen table. She noticed my expression. "Grandma, are you okay?" I smiled. "I think so." But the truth was different. Something inside me had become very calm. For weeks, I had been preparing, changing passwords, collecting documents, speaking with Susan, visiting the apartment by the lake, making decisions. And now, somehow, I knew. Today was my final day. Not my final day as a mother. Not my final day as a grandmother. My final day as unpaid labor. The children left for school. The house became quiet. At 9 o'clock, Michael called. "Can you stop by the garage?" "What's wrong?" "The payroll software is acting up." I drove there. His employees greeted me warmly. Several of them assumed I actually worked there. One mechanic smiled. "Glad you're here. We can't survive without you." Michael laughed. "Believe me, neither can I." He meant it as a compliment. Yet the words settled heavily inside me. Can't survive without you. The truth was that they had built entire lives around my availability. For nearly 3 hours, I organized invoices, corrected payroll records, and answered customer calls. At noon, Michael walked into the office. "Thanks, Mom." I looked at him, 39 years old, hardworking, stressed, tired, a good man in many ways, but also a man who had forgotten that his mother was not his employee. "Michael." "Yeah. If I stopped helping here someday, what would you do?" He laughed. "You won't." The answer came instantly, without hesitation, because the possibility had never occurred to him. I drove home slowly. Spring sunlight covered the roads. Trees were beginning to bloom. I realized I had not noticed the seasons changing in years. My life had become schedules and responsibilities. Nothing more. At 2 o'clock, Lauren arrived. She carried her dog, Daisy. "Can you keep her this weekend?" I stood in the doorway. Lauren was smiling. She assumed the answer. She always assumed. "I'm not sure." She looked surprised. "You don't have plans, do you?" That question. Again, you don't have plans. As though my life existed only when someone else wasn't using it. "I might." Lauren laughed. "Mom, you're mysterious lately." Maybe I was. Or maybe I was simply becoming a person again. She left Daisy anyway. I watched her drive away. For a moment, anger appeared. Then sadness, because my daughter genuinely believed I would always be there, and perhaps I had taught her that. At 4 o'clock, Rebecca called. "Can the kids stay until 8? Mark wants to go out." I looked at the clock. I looked at the kitchen. I looked at Thomas's photograph sitting beside the window. "Okay." It would be the last time. Emily noticed something different that evening. We made dinner together. She helped wash dishes. At one point, she asked, "Grandma, are you going somewhere?" My hands stopped moving. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. "You seem happy and sad at the same time." Children see things adults miss. I smiled. "Maybe I'm thinking about some changes." Emily nodded. "I think that would be good." Those words stayed with me. At 8:30, Rebecca finally arrived. She rushed through the door. "Thank you, Mom. You're a lifesaver." Again. Always the same phrase. Lifesaver. But no one ever asked whether the lifeguard was drowning. After everyone left, the house became completely silent. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen, the living room, Thomas's office, our bedroom. I touched the backs of chairs, ran my fingers along bookshelves, looked at old photographs. 41 years of marriage, 3 children, countless memories. And somewhere during those years, I had forgotten myself. At 10 o'clock, I opened my blue notebook. The pages were filled. Hours, money, tasks, appointments, babysitting, loans, errands, years of my life. I turned to a blank page. For several minutes, I stared at it. Then I wrote, "I officially retire tomorrow." The words frightened me. Retire from what? From being needed, from being available, from disappearing. I walked to the kitchen. One by one, I gathered keys. Rebecca's key, Michael's key, Lauren's key, the garage office key, the spare house key, the emergency key. 6 keys. I placed them carefully on the kitchen table. Then I sat down. Midnight approached. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. I took out a sheet of paper. For nearly an hour, I tried to write a letter. I wrote paragraphs, crossed them out, started over, explained, apologized, cried. None of it felt right. Because I wasn't leaving to punish them. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I simply needed to stop. Finally, I wrote one sentence. "I have officially retired. Please do not assign me any more unpaid duties." Nothing else. No accusations, no anger, no list of sacrifices, only the truth. At 1 o'clock in the morning, I walked upstairs. My suitcase sat beside the bed. It wasn't large. Several outfits, toiletries, Thomas's letter, my notebook, family photographs, the essentials, the things that still belonged to Angelina Hayes. I sat on the edge of the bed. The fear finally arrived. What if Rebecca cried? What if Michael became angry? What if Lauren thought I had abandoned them? What if everyone hated me? The questions filled the room. Then another question appeared. What if I stay? I already knew that answer. Nothing changes. Years pass. My health declines. My life disappears. And one day, I become a woman who never truly lived her own retirement. I looked at Thomas's photograph. I hope you understand. The room remained quiet. But somehow I felt his presence, the same steady presence that had carried me through 41 years of marriage. At 5 o'clock the following morning, I carried my suitcase downstairs. Outside, dawn was beginning. The kitchen table waited. 6 keys, 1 note, 40 years of motherhood, and 1 woman finally choosing herself. Before leaving, I looked around the house one final time. Then I turned off my phone, locked the front door, placed the house key beside the others, and quietly walked away. I was halfway to the lake when my phone began ringing. The sun had barely risen. Morning fog still covered parts of the highway. For the first time in years, I had nowhere I needed to be. No school pickup, no payroll, no grocery list, no appointments that belonged to someone else. Only the road ahead of me. My phone vibrated again. Rebecca. I looked at the screen. For several seconds, I considered answering. Instead, I placed the phone back inside my purse. A minute later, it rang again. Michael, then Lauren, then Rebecca again. By the time I reached the apartment community near the lake, I had 11 missed calls. 11. I sat in my parked car. My hands rested on the steering wheel. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it. Part of me wanted to turn around, drive home, apologize, explain, make breakfast, fix everything. That instinct had controlled me my entire life. But another voice, quieter and steadier, said something different. If you go back now, nothing will ever change. I turned off the engine. The silence inside the car felt almost unreal. At 8 o'clock, my phone began vibrating continuously. Text messages, voicemails, notifications. I finally opened the first message. Rebecca, Mom, where are you? Michael, call me immediately. Lauren, are you okay? The fourth message came from Rebecca again. The kids are waiting. Waiting, as though I had simply arrived late to work. I closed the phone. Inside the apartment office, the manager smiled warmly. Good morning, Angelina. No one there needed anything from me. No one handed me a schedule. No one assigned responsibilities. She gave me the keys to the temporary furnished unit I had rented for several weeks. Apartment 214, second floor, Lakeview. I carried my suitcase upstairs. The apartment was simple. A small kitchen, 1 bedroom, large windows. Sunlight reflected across the water outside. For several minutes, I simply stood there. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody could walk through the front door. Nobody expected dinner. Nobody needed a ride. The silence was almost overwhelming. Then my phone rang again. Rebecca. This time, I answered. Mom. Her voice sounded frightened. Where are you? I'm safe. What happened? I left. What do you mean you left? I closed my eyes. I needed some time. There was silence. Then, the children are waiting for you. I felt something break inside me. Not because she was cruel. Because her first concern wasn't whether I was safe. It was the schedule. I won't be picking them up today. What? You'll need to make other arrangements. Rebecca's breathing changed. Mom, I have work. I understand. Please tell me where you are. No. The silence that followed felt enormous. Finally, she whispered, Are you angry with us? I didn't know how to answer. Because anger wasn't the right word. Exhaustion. Sadness. Emptiness. Grief. Those were closer. I just need some space. She began crying. Please, come home. Home. The word hurt. Because I wasn't sure my house had felt like home for a very long time. After the call ended, I sat beside the window. The lake moved gently below. Birds crossed the water. The world continued, even though I had stopped. At 10 o'clock, Michael called. I answered. Mom, where are you? I'm safe. We went to your house. I imagined them standing in my kitchen. The 6 keys, the note, the empty rooms. What does this mean? It means I'm retired. Silence. Then he laughed, not because it was funny, because he didn't understand. Retired from what? I swallowed. From working for everyone. Nobody asked you to leave. No, but nobody asked me to stay either. His voice became frustrated. The payroll isn't finished. For several seconds, I could not speak. The payroll, Even now, even today. I'm sorry.
You're sorry. I can't do it anymore.
He lowered his voice.
Are you having some kind of breakdown?
The question stunned me, because the moment I stopped functioning for everyone else, something must be wrong.
No.
Then what is this? I looked outside. The lake shimmered in the sunlight. This is me resting. He hung up. The first message from Lauren arrived around noon. Mom, please call me. 20 minutes later, I'm worried. An hour later, did I do something I finally called her? She answered immediately. Mom, I'm okay. She began crying. We thought something happened. I understood, because disappearing without explanation was frightening. But another part of me remembered all the years when nobody noticed that something had already happened. Something had happened to Angelina. She had disappeared slowly, day by day, year by year, without anyone asking where she had gone. Did I upset you? Lauren asked. I hesitated. This isn't about one person.
Then what is it?
I looked around the apartment. The quiet, the sunlight, the stillness.
It's about me.
She didn't understand. None of them did. By afternoon, dozens of messages had arrived. Rebecca, Emily missed practice. Michael, call me now. Lauren, please tell us where you are. Several relatives had apparently become involved. My sister left a voicemail. A cousin sent a message. Everyone wanted answers. But what surprised me most was what nobody asked. No one said, "Are you happy? Do you need help? Were you lonely? Are you hurting?" The questions remained practical. The schedule, the children, the work, the responsibilities. Around 4 o'clock, Emily sent a text. Just one sentence. Grandma, are you okay? I stared at it. Tears immediately filled my eyes, because she was the first person to ask. The first. I answered, yes, sweetheart. I love you. Several minutes later, I love you too. That evening, I walked beside the lake. The air was cool. Older couples sat on benches. A woman painted near the water. Someone was reading beneath a tree. Nobody knew me. Nobody needed me. And somehow, that felt both terrifying and beautiful. When I returned to the apartment, I finally listened to Rebecca's voicemail. Her voice cracked. Mom, Emily found your note. I closed my eyes. She cried. My heart ached, because I had never wanted to hurt my grandchildren. Then Rebecca continued. She said you worked harder than anyone. Tears rolled down my face. Emily had seen me. Perhaps she had always seen me. Before going to bed, I looked at my phone one final time. 47 messages, 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails. For years, those numbers would have made me panic. But tonight, they felt different. Because for the first time, the world had not ended when Angelina Hayes stopped answering. The children would get home. The payroll would wait. The dog would survive. Dinner would be ordered. People would adjust. And lying alone in a quiet apartment beside a lake, I finally understood something. My family had never believed I could leave. Perhaps because I had never believed it either. But now, they were beginning to learn something I had only recently discovered myself. The woman they depended on had been exhausted for years, and the free labor they took for granted had finally gone home to herself. The first person to find me was not one of my children. It was Susan. On my second morning at the apartment by the lake, She arrived carrying coffee and a paper bag filled with muffins. I opened the door wearing an old sweater and no makeup. She smiled. "You slept?" I nodded. "For the first time in months." She stepped inside. The apartment was still mostly empty. One suitcase, several books, Thomas's letter, my blue notebook, and a woman who still felt guilty every time her phone rang. Susan sat beside the window. "Have they been calling?" I laughed quietly. "Constantly." "Have they asked if you're all right?" I looked down at my coffee. "Not exactly." That answer seemed to tell her everything. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang again. "Michael," I answered. His voice sounded exhausted. "Mom, where are you?" "I'm safe." "You need to come home." The words were immediate, not please, not can we talk. "You need to come home." "No." Silence. "What do you mean, no? I mean, no." I heard him breathing heavily. "The payroll didn't get finished." There it was. Again. Not his mother. The payroll. "Michael, you'll have to handle it." "I don't know how." His words almost broke my heart, because perhaps that was true. I had spent years preventing my children from struggling, and in doing so, I had never allowed them to become fully responsible. "Then you'll learn." His voice became sharp. "You're punishing us." "No." "Then what is this?" I looked out at the lake. A woman walked her dog near the water. 2 older men were fishing. Life continued peacefully. "This is me stopping." He hung up. By noon, things had become worse. Rebecca called, crying. "Emily missed her dentist appointment." "I'm sorry." "The office charged us." I remained quiet. "Mom, the children are upset." "I understand." "They think you're angry." Perhaps I was. But anger was only one piece of the truth. The larger truth was grief. Grief for the years I had lost. Grief for the woman I had become. Rebecca's voice softened. "Please tell me where you are." "I can't." "Why?" "Because if they came, they would convince me to return. Because I still loved them. Because guilt remained stronger than freedom." But I couldn't explain that. "I need time." After the call ended, I walked beside the lake. Every few minutes, my phone vibrated. Messages, voicemails, questions, demands, confusion. And then one message from Lauren. "Michael says you're having some kind of breakdown." I stopped walking. Breakdown. The word stayed in my mind. A woman spends years serving everyone. She becomes exhausted. She finally leaves. And suddenly she must be unstable. Not tired, not overwhelmed, not lonely, broken. I called Lauren. She answered immediately. "Mom, I'm not having a breakdown." She sounded relieved. "Michael thinks something is wrong." Something was wrong. Silence. "What?" I disappeared. She didn't answer. "I stopped existing, Lauren." "I don't understand." "I know." That was the problem. None of them understood. Because my suffering had been quiet. No dramatic scenes, no arguments, just years of saying yes. Late that afternoon, Susan received a phone call. She looked uncomfortable. It was Michael. My stomach tightened. "What did he want?" "He wanted to know if you were mentally well." I stared at her. "He what?" "He asked whether I thought you were confused or overwhelmed." The room became completely silent. because suddenly I understood something frightening. My children could accept that I was sick. They could accept that I was confused. They could accept that I was grieving. But they could not accept that I had made a rational decision to stop serving them. Susan looked at me carefully.
Do you want me to speak to them? No. Are you sure? Yes, because they needed to hear my voice. Not hers, not a lawyer's, mine. The following morning, I returned home, not to stay, only to collect more belongings. I parked several houses away. My hands were shaking. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. Birds, lawns, mailboxes. My own house. For several minutes, I sat in the car. Then I walked toward the front door. Rebecca's vehicle sat in the driveway, Michael's truck beside it, Lauren's car. My heart immediately sank. They were waiting. The moment I opened the door, everyone stood. Rebecca looked exhausted. Michael appeared angry. Lauren was crying. Nobody spoke. The kitchen table remained exactly as I had left it. The keys, the note, my entire life reduced to one sentence. Rebecca finally spoke. Where have you been? I'm safe. Michael crossed his arms. Do you know what you've done? I looked at him. Yes. No, you don't.
He pointed toward the note.
You left us.
Those words hurt, because in many ways they were true, but another truth existed. I've been here for years. Silence. You just didn't notice. Rebecca began crying. The children think you don't love them. I felt tears fill my eyes. I love them more than anything. Then why are you doing this? I looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, washed endless dishes, prepared birthdays, Christmas dinners, school lunches. I spoke quietly. Because I can't do it anymore. Michael shook his head.
We never asked for this.
No, you expected it. Lauren finally spoke. We need you. The words hung in the air, and perhaps that was the first honest sentence anyone had spoken. We need you, not we miss you, not we love you, not are you okay? We need you. I sat down. Suddenly, I felt very tired. For what? Nobody answered. Because the answer was obvious. Everything. Rebecca looked at me. The children. Michael said, the garage. Lauren whispered, everything. I nodded. That's exactly the problem. The room became quiet. For the first time, I believe my children truly heard me. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to realize that something had broken. Michael looked angry. Rebecca looked frightened. Lauren looked confused. And I sat there feeling strangely calm because I finally understood something. Their anger was not proof that I had done the wrong thing. It was proof that they had built their lives around my sacrifice. Eventually, Michael stood. If this is what you want, fine. His voice was cold. But don't expect us to understand. He left. Rebecca followed soon afterward. Lauren hugged me before leaving. She whispered, I don't know who you are right now. I held her tightly. Neither do I. When the house became quiet again, I walked slowly through each room. I packed several more boxes. Family photographs, Thomas's fishing hat, my painting supplies, old books, the pieces of myself I had forgotten. As I carried the final box to my car, I looked back at the house. For years, I had believed leaving would destroy my family. Instead, something else was happening. They were finally being forced to stand on their own. And perhaps the most painful part for all of us was this: none of us had realized how much of their lives had been resting on the shoulders of one tired woman. The family meeting was Rebecca's idea. She called Susan first. Then she called me. "We need to talk." I sat beside the lake outside my apartment. The wind moved gently across the water. For nearly a week, my life had become strangely quiet. I attended a watercolor class. I drank coffee on my balcony. I slept through the night, and for the first time in years, I woke up without somebody else's schedule waiting for me. Yet despite the peace, my heart remained heavy, because I missed my grandchildren. I missed family dinners. I even missed the chaos. What I did not miss was disappearing. "When?" I asked. "Sunday." "Where?" "My house." I looked at the water. Part of me wanted to refuse, but another part knew this conversation had been waiting for years. "I'll come." Rebecca hesitated. "Mom." "Yes. Please don't bring a lawyer." I looked down at my coffee. I wasn't planning to. But after the call ended, I telephoned Susan. "I think you should come." She didn't ask why. "Of course." Sunday arrived with gray skies and steady rain. The drive to Rebecca's house felt longer than usual. Susan sat beside me. "You don't have to prove your pain," she said quietly. "I know." "You're not on trial." Yet it certainly felt that way. When we entered the house, everyone was already there. Rebecca, her husband Mark, Michael, Lauren. Even Emily sat quietly near the window. The room immediately became tense. Michael looked directly at Susan. "You brought an attorney." Susan remained calm. "Angelina asked me to attend." Michael shook his head. "This is ridiculous." Perhaps it was, but for years I had entered every conversation alone. This time, I wanted someone beside me. We sat around the dining table. Ironically, it was the same table where so many family dinners had taken place. The same table where I had once asked, if I'm retired, why am I working for all of you? Rebecca spoke first. "We want to understand." I nodded. "Good." Michael crossed his arms. "Because none of this makes sense." Susan remained silent. This conversation belonged to me. I reached into my bag. The blue notebook. For several seconds, nobody recognized it. Then I placed it on the table. "What is that?" Lauren asked. "My life." I opened the first pages. Dates, hours, tasks, appointments, money, school pickups, garage work, babysitting, loans, errands. Rebecca leaned forward. Michael frowned. Lauren became quiet. "I started writing things down several months ago." "Why?" Rebecca asked. "Because I was disappearing, but instead I answered honestly. Because I needed to know if I was imagining things." Nobody spoke. I began reading. March 8th, school pickup, 4 hours. March 9th, payroll, 3 hours. March 11th, emergency babysitting. Loan to Lauren, $500. Page after page, week after week, year after year. The room became very still. Michael finally spoke. "You kept records?" "Yes." "Of helping your family?" I looked at him. "No, of losing my life." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Emily sat quietly. Susan finally spoke. "Angelina worked approximately 30 to 40 unpaid hours every week." Michael immediately responded, "Nobody forced her." The sentence hit me harder than I expected, because technically it was true. No one had held a gun to my head. No one had demanded, but expectations can become their own form of pressure. I looked at my son. No, Michael, you didn't force me. Exactly. You simply stopped giving me permission to say no. Silence. Rebecca whispered, Mom. I continued. When I had doctor appointments, I rescheduled them. When I had plans, I canceled them. When I was tired, I stayed awake. When I was sick, I still showed up. Lauren lowered her eyes. I turned another page. I gave loans. I provided childcare. I managed payroll. I cooked holidays. I cleaned. I drove. I solved emergencies. My voice began shaking. And nobody ever asked whether I wanted any of it. Rebecca started crying. I didn't know. Those words hurt because I believed her. She truly hadn't known. Because I had hidden my exhaustion. I had smiled. I had said yes. I had made everything look easy. Michael remained defensive. Families help each other. I nodded. They do. He spread his hands. So, what's the problem? I looked directly at him. When was the last time you helped me? He opened his mouth, then stopped. Rebecca tried. The kids love you. I know, Lauren whispered. I love you. I know. But love is not the same as responsibility. Susan gently slid several papers across the table. Michael looked confused. What is this? An estimate? For what? The value of Angelina's unpaid labor? The numbers were shocking. Childcare, bookkeeping, transportation, housekeeping, administrative work, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of dollars. Michael stared at the page. Rebecca covered her mouth. Lauren began crying again. I'm not asking for money, I said. Then why show us this? Michael asked. So you understand. The rain continued outside. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Emily stood up. She looked at her mother, then at me, and quietly she said, Grandma did everything. Everyone looked at her. She swallowed. She missed her own doctor appointment for Noah. Rebecca looked down. She stayed awake when I was sick. Michael looked away. She came to every game. Emily's voice broke, and nobody noticed. The room became silent. Because sometimes truth sounds different when it comes from a child. I reached across the table and held Emily's hand. Rebecca finally whispered, I'm sorry. The words felt genuine, but they were only the beginning. Michael remained quiet. Lauren cried openly. Susan gathered the papers. I took a deep breath. There will be some changes. Everyone looked up. I will not babysit every week. I will not do payroll. I will not loan money. I will not be everyone's emergency contact. Rebecca wiped her eyes. What happens now? I looked around the room, at my children, my family, people I loved, people who had hurt me, people who perhaps never realized they had. I become your mother again. Michael finally spoke. And if we need help, I answered gently, you ask. The difference seemed so small, but it changed everything. Ask, not assume, not assign, not expect, ask. As the meeting ended, nobody hugged. Nobody smiled. The wounds were too fresh. The truths too heavy. But something important had happened.
For the first time in years, Angelina Hayes had entered a room not as a babysitter, not as a bookkeeper, not as free labor, but simply as herself. And for the first time, her family had finally been forced to meet the woman they had forgotten. The first person to visit me at the lake was not Rebecca. It was Emily. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon carrying a paper bag and looking nervous. I opened the apartment door and stared at her in surprise. "Emily," she smiled weakly. "Mom drove me here." I looked outside. Rebecca's car sat near the entrance. She remained inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Emily held up the paper bag. "I brought cinnamon rolls." I almost laughed, because Thomas used to buy cinnamon rolls every Saturday morning. Somehow Emily remembered. We sat on the balcony overlooking the water. The spring air was cool. Boats moved slowly across the lake. For several minutes, she simply looked around the apartment. "It's nice here." "It is." "You seem happier." The honesty of teenagers can sometimes be uncomfortable, but she was right. I was sleeping again. My headaches had improved. I had started painting. I attended a book club every Wednesday. For the first time in years, my calendar belonged to me. Emily took a deep breath. "Mom cries a lot." My heart sank. I never wanted to hurt her. "I know." She looked down at her hands. "But I think she's scared." Of what? Doing everything herself. The answer was so simple, so honest, and perhaps that was the real problem all along. Everyone had become afraid of responsibility because I had carried it for them. After a few minutes, Emily spoke again. "You know, I understand, right?" My eyes filled with tears. "What do you understand?" She smiled sadly. "You were tired." No one had said those words more clearly. Not Rebecca, not Michael, not Lauren. A 17-year-old girl had somehow seen exactly what everyone else had missed. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly. "I don't want you to come back if it makes you sad." I held her for several seconds. "Thank you." As she walked toward Rebecca's car, my daughter finally stepped outside. She looked uncertain, older somehow, as if the past several weeks had aged her. "Can we talk?" I nodded. We sat beside the lake. Neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "I've had to leave work 3 times. I remained quiet. The school called twice. She looked down. Noah forgot his soccer uniform. A small part of me wanted to solve everything, offer help, fix the problem, but I remained silent. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. "I didn't realize how much you did." The words hung between us, because that had always been the issue, not malice, not cruelty, blindness. Rebecca wiped her eyes. "I thought you liked helping." "I did. But not every day." She nodded. "I see that now." For the first time, we spoke honestly. About Thomas, about grief, about the years after his death. Rebecca confessed something that surprised me. "After Dad died, I was terrified." "Of what?" "That we'd lose you too." I looked at her. She continued. "You always needed to be busy." She was right. After losing Thomas, helping everyone had protected me from loneliness. But slowly, it became something else. Dependency. For them. And for me. Rebecca reached for my hand. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix it." "Then what?" "We learn." She nodded slowly.
Before leaving, she hugged me. The first genuine hug in a very long time. Not because she needed childcare, not because she needed help, simply because she was my daughter. Several days later, Michael called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice sounded exhausted.
I fired the bookkeeper.
I blinked. What? The woman we hired after you left. I sat quietly.
She wasn't very good.
Part of me wanted to point out that he had spent years receiving professional bookkeeping services for free. Instead, I simply listened. He sighed.
The payroll system crashed.
I'm sorry. Another silence, then something unexpected. I was angry. I waited. I thought you abandoned us. I closed my eyes. And now, I think maybe we abandoned you first. The words nearly took my breath away. Michael rarely spoke emotionally. He was practical, reserved, very much like Thomas. Hearing those words felt enormous. I never meant to hurt you. I know. But I don't know how to do all this. For the first time in years, he sounded like a son instead of an employer.
You'll learn.
He laughed softly.
That's exactly what you said before.
I meant it. Before ending the call, he asked, "Would you have dinner with me sometime? Not, can you help? Not, can you come to the garage? Only dinner." I smiled. Yes. Lauren took longer. She visited unexpectedly one afternoon. Only this time, she knocked. The sound almost made me laugh. When I opened the door, she stood holding flowers. "These are for you." I invited her inside. She looked around the apartment. "It feels peaceful." "It is." She sat quietly. No requests. No emergencies. No financial problems. Finally, she began crying. "I've been awful." I shook my head. "No." "Yes." She wiped her eyes. "I always assumed you'd rescue me." I thought carefully. "Because I always did." She nodded. "I don't know how to be an adult sometimes." The honesty broke my heart. Because beneath all the frustration, Lauren was still my daughter. Still frightened. Still searching. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a check. $200. "It's not everything. You don't have to." "I do." I looked at her. Perhaps it wasn't about money. Perhaps it was about responsibility. For the first time, she was trying. The following Sunday, I attended church near the lake. After the service, several women invited me to lunch. One had recently become widowed. Another had retired. A third had moved there after raising 4 children. Their stories sounded familiar. Years of caregiving, years of sacrifice, years of disappearing. One woman said quietly, "Sometimes retirement means learning who you are again." I thought about those words all afternoon. Because I was learning. I painted twice a week. I walked every morning. I read books. I sat quietly. I remembered things I loved. And slowly, very slowly, Angelina Hayes began returning. One evening, I opened my blue notebook. The final entries remained painful. Hours, money, exhaustion, sacrifice. I turned to the last page. For a long time, I stared at it. Then I wrote, "Today." Michael invited me to dinner. Rebecca asked how I was feeling. Lauren brought flowers. Emily understood. The list looked small, yet somehow it felt enormous. Because perhaps change does not arrive dramatically. Perhaps it arrives one honest conversation at a time. One apology. One boundary. One knock on the door instead of using a key. As the sun disappeared over the lake, I sat on my balcony holding Thomas's letter. For months, I had believed my family might never forgive me. Now, I was beginning to understand something different. They were not losing their mother. They were meeting her again. And for the first time in many years, I felt hopeful that perhaps we could become a family once more. Not built on obligation, not built on exhaustion, but built on something we had forgotten: choice. The truth about the house came out on a rainy Thursday evening. By then, nearly 2 months had passed since I left. Summer was beginning. The flowers outside my apartment had fully bloomed. I had finished 3 paintings. I attended church regularly. I had friends, not relatives, not people who needed favors, just friends. The strange thing about reclaiming your life is that it feels uncomfortable at first. You almost expect someone to take it back. That Thursday, Rebecca called. Her voice sounded nervous. "Can we meet?" "Of course." "At your house." My house. The old house. I had visited only a few times since moving to the lake. Most of my belongings remained there. The room still carried Thomas's memory. And if I was honest, part of me still hurt every time I walked through the front door. When I arrived, all 3 of my children were already there. Rebecca, Michael, Lauren. The atmosphere felt different. No anger, no accusations, only discomfort. Something was wrong. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where years of my life had disappeared. Rebecca finally spoke. "There's something we need to tell you." Immediately, my stomach tightened. Michael looked away. Lauren stared at her hands. I suddenly felt cold. "What is it?" Nobody answered. Rebecca took a deep breath. "A few months before you left, we talked about the house." I waited. "What about it?" Michael finally spoke. "We thought maybe you should sell." The words themselves did not surprise me. The house was large. Many widows downsize. That part seemed reasonable. But something inside me told me there was more. Rebecca continued. "We thought maybe you could move in with us." I looked at her carefully. "With you?" She nodded. "You'd have your own room." My heart began beating faster. A room, not a home, a room. Lauren quietly added, "It seemed practical." Practical. Such a dangerous word. I looked at all 3 of them. "When did you discuss this?" No one answered immediately. Michael finally said, "About a year ago." A year. While I was cooking dinners, watching grandchildren, doing payroll, loaning money, driving to appointments. A year. I felt my hands begin to shake. And what would happen to this house? Silence. Rebecca swallowed. "We thought selling it would help everyone." There it was. The truth. Not all at once, but enough. I looked at my daughter. "What does that mean?" She looked down. "The money could be divided." The room became completely silent. For several seconds, I honestly could not breathe. Thomas's house, our home, 41 years, birthdays, Christmas mornings, the room where he died, the garden we planted, the kitchen we built. And while I was sacrificing my life for my children, they had already begun discussing what to do with my home. Michael spoke quickly. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it." He struggled. "We thought it would be easier." "For whom?" No answer. Lauren started crying. "We thought you'd be lonely." I looked at her. "No, you thought I'd still babysit." Nobody spoke. The truth had finally entered the room. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "The kids could be near you." And I could keep raising them. She lowered her head. I stood up. For several moments, I walked around the kitchen. The old cabinets, the photographs, Thomas's favorite chair, the window above the sink. Everything suddenly felt fragile. Then I remembered something. The folder, the documents. Thomas. Without saying anything, I walked into the study. The room remained almost unchanged. I opened the cabinet where I had stored the property papers. When I returned to the kitchen, everyone looked confused. I placed the documents on the table. Rebecca looked at them first. Michael leaned forward. Lauren wiped her eyes. The papers clearly stated what Thomas had arranged years earlier. The house belonged entirely to me. Not jointly, not partially. Entirely. In addition, there was a provision. If I ever became unable to manage my affairs, decisions regarding the property would require both my written approval and legal oversight. Thomas had protected me. Years before any of this happened. Michael looked shocked. He did this? Yes. Rebecca whispered. He thought we'd take the house. I looked at her. No. He trusted us. I think he worried about me. Nobody spoke. Because perhaps Thomas had understood something all along. Not that his children were bad people, but that people often become comfortable when someone gives too much. Eventually, Michael stood. I never wanted your house. I believed him, partially. But I also believed something else. People can convince themselves that convenience is kindness, that dependence is love, that helping someone means controlling their future. Rebecca cried openly now. I thought you would live with us. And then what? She looked confused. What do you mean? Would I still watch the children? Silence. Would I still cook? Silence. Would I still do everything? Her tears answered before her words did. Because yes, probably. Perhaps not intentionally, but inevitably. I sat down again. My anger had faded. Only sadness remained. I gave you all so much. Rebecca nodded. I know. No? I shook my head. You know now. That sentence seemed to break something inside all of us. Because it was true. For years, my sacrifices had become invisible. Only my absence had finally made them visible again. Lauren quietly reached across the table. I'm sorry. Michael sat back down. His voice sounded different, tired, ashamed. Dad saw this coming, didn't he? I looked toward the study, toward Thomas's desk, toward the letter resting safely in my apartment. Maybe, Rebecca asked softly. Are you ever coming home? The question lingered. I looked around the kitchen. I loved this house. I always would. But something had changed. The lake apartment had become mine. The silence, the paintings, the mornings, the peace. Home was no longer only a building. It was the place where Angelina existed. I don't know. Rebecca began crying again. I miss you. For the first time in months, I believed her completely. Not because she needed childcare, not because she needed help, because she missed her mother. And perhaps that was progress. As the evening ended, nobody argued. Nobody raised their voice. The truth had been painful enough. Outside, rain continued falling. Michael hugged me. The first genuine hug in years. Lauren kissed my cheek. Rebecca held my hand for several seconds. When I finally walked toward my car, I looked back at the house. The porch light glowed softly. Thomas used to leave it on whenever I went somewhere, so I could always find my way home. And suddenly, I realized something. My husband had not protected the house. He had protected me. because he understood something I had spent years learning. A woman who sacrifices everything eventually loses herself, and the people who love her may not even notice. Until one day, she finally leaves. Autumn arrived quietly. The leaves around the lake slowly turned gold. The mornings became colder. The air smelled different, and for the first time in many years, I noticed every season changing. Because I was finally living inside my own life. 6 months had passed since I walked out of my house carrying a single suitcase. 6 months since I left the keys on the kitchen table. 6 months since I officially retired. Sometimes it still felt impossible. I had developed routines: coffee on the balcony, morning walks, painting classes every Tuesday, book club on Wednesdays, church on Sundays. Simple things, ordinary things. Yet they felt extraordinary because they belonged to me. My relationship with my children had changed too. Not perfectly. Healing never happens perfectly, but slowly. Rebecca now called before visiting. Michael hired a professional accountant. Lauren started working a second job and had not borrowed money in months. And perhaps the biggest change of all, they began asking. Not expecting, asking. One Friday afternoon, Michael invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. We met at a small diner near his garage. For several minutes, we talked about ordinary things: weather, football, Emily's college applications, the business. Then Michael finally looked at me. "You seem different." I smiled. "I am." He nodded. "I was angry." "I know. I thought you chose yourself over us." The sentence lingered between us, because in some ways it was true, and perhaps that was what frightened him. I stirred my coffee. I had to. Michael looked down. "When Dad died, I didn't know what to do." His voice was quieter than usual. "I depended on you." "I know. I think I kept depending on you." I reached across the table. He was still my son. Still the little boy who once sat beside Thomas in the garage. "We both did." He nodded. Then he surprised me. "I read Dad's letter." I blinked. "What?" "He left a copy for me." My heart stopped. "A copy." Michael smiled sadly. "He wrote it years ago." I had never known. Michael reached into his jacket and unfolded a piece of paper. His father's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. "Your mother will give you everything if you let her. Please, don't let her." Tears filled my eyes. Thomas, even now, still protecting me. Michael looked away. "I didn't understand it before. And now," he swallowed, "I do." We sat quietly. Sometimes healing happens through words, sometimes through silence. Several weeks later, Emily received acceptance letters from 2 universities. The entire family gathered at Rebecca's house. For the first time in many years, I arrived as a guest. Not the cook, not the babysitter, not the organizer. Rebecca and Mark prepared dinner. Michael brought dessert. Lauren decorated the dining room. I simply walked in carrying flowers. The feeling almost made me cry. Emily ran toward me. "I got into both schools." I hugged her tightly. "I knew you would." During dinner, Rebecca suddenly stood. She held a glass in her hand. The room became quiet. "I want to say something." She looked directly at me. "Mom, I owe you an apology." My heart immediately began beating faster. She continued, "For years, I thought you would always be there." Tears filled her eyes. "I thought helping made you happy." She looked around the room.
But really, we made your entire life about ours. Nobody spoke. Michael lowered his eyes. Lauren cried softly.
Rebecca took a deep breath. "You spent years raising us." Her voice broke. "And then we asked you to do it all over again." The room became silent because the truth was finally standing openly among us. She walked toward me. "I miss having you every day." I took her hand. "I know, but I don't want you to disappear again." I couldn't answer immediately because for the first time, my daughter saw me. Not grandma, not babysitter, not emergency contact. Me. Emily suddenly stood. She smiled. "I want to say something too." Everyone laughed softly. She looked directly at me. "When Grandma left, I was scared." I felt tears returning. "But now she's my hero." The room became completely quiet. Emily continued, "Most people wait until they're old to stop living." She smiled. "Grandma started living again." No one could speak, not even me. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Rebecca walked me to my car. The autumn air felt cold. She looked at me carefully. "Are you happy?" Such a simple question. Yet perhaps nobody had asked me that in years. I thought about the lake, the apartment, my paintings, my friends, my mornings, my peace, myself. "Yes," Rebecca smiled through tears. "I'm glad." Driving home, I realized something important. For months, I had feared losing my family. Instead, something different had happened. We had lost the old relationship, the unhealthy one, the exhausting one, the relationship built on sacrifice and expectation. And slowly, something new had appeared. Respect. The following week, Susan invited me to lunch. We sat near the lake, the same place where she had first asked, "When was the last time your needs came first?" She smiled. "You look younger." I laughed. "I sleep now." She nodded. "And your family? They're learning." "And you?" I looked at the water. The sunlight reflected gently across the surface. "I'm learning too." "What?" I thought carefully. "That I can love people without carrying them." Susan smiled. "That's an important lesson." As autumn deepened, I began painting more seriously. One afternoon, I finished a picture of the lake at sunrise. The colors reminded me of my first morning there, the day I arrived terrified and alone. I hung the painting in my apartment. Beneath it, I placed Thomas's photograph. Sometimes I sat there in silence, speaking to him, thanking him, missing him. One evening, while watching the sun disappear behind the water, I whispered, "You were right." The room remained quiet. But somehow, I felt him beside me. The same steady love, the same gentle wisdom. Please remember that your life belongs to you too. I finally understood. Not because I had abandoned my family, but because I had finally returned to myself. And perhaps that was the gift Thomas had wanted to give me all along. Winter arrived quietly at the lake. The trees stood bare. The water reflected pale gray skies. Snow occasionally covered the walking paths outside my apartment. And every morning, before the sun rose, I sat beside my window with a cup of coffee and watched the world wake up. 1 year had passed. 1 entire year since I placed 6 keys on my kitchen table. 1 year since I walked away. 1 year since I retired from my family. Sometimes I still struggled to believe it. The woman who had once lived entirely for everyone else now owned her mornings, her afternoons, her weekends, her life. The first thing I learned was that peace feels unfamiliar when you've spent years surviving chaos. For months after moving to the lake, I kept expecting emergencies, phone calls, problems, someone needing something, but gradually the calls changed. Rebecca called to ask how I was feeling. Michael invited me to lunch. Lauren shared good news about work. Emily called from college. No one asked me to rescue them anymore, and somehow because of that, I could finally enjoy being their mother again. Emily left for college in September. The entire family helped her move into her dorm room. As we carried boxes upstairs, she suddenly pulled me aside. "Grandma." "Yes." She smiled. "I got accepted into the art program." I nearly cried. "You never told me." "I wanted to tell you in person." She hesitated. "You inspired me." I laughed softly. "How?" She looked directly at me. "You taught me that it's never too late to become yourself." The words stayed with me for days, because perhaps that was the real ending to my story. Not leaving, not retiring, becoming myself again. A few weeks later, Michael invited me to the garage. For the first time in over a year, I walked inside without carrying paperwork. The office had changed. New computers, a new accountant, new filing systems. Michael smiled. "I wanted you to see this." I looked around. "You did all this?" He nodded. "I had to." We stood quietly. Then he said something I never expected. "You saved me by leaving." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I finally had to grow up." Those words brought tears to my eyes. Because perhaps helping someone forever prevents them from discovering what they can do themselves. Michael continued. "I used to think you made things easier." He smiled. "But you made me lazy." We both laughed, and for the first time in many years, I felt like I was standing beside my son instead of working for him. Lauren changed too. She found stable employment. She paid off most of her debt. She started therapy. One afternoon, she visited my apartment carrying a small wrapped gift. Inside was a paintbrush set, professional quality, beautiful wooden handles. "I thought you might need these." I looked at her. "You remembered." She smiled. "You used to paint before I was born." Nobody had remembered that part of me for decades. Not because they were cruel, because I had hidden her. The woman who painted, the woman who dreamed, the woman who wanted things. She had disappeared beneath motherhood, and now she was returning. Rebecca perhaps changed the most. She learned how difficult parenting truly was without constant support. Not because I abandoned her, because she finally carried responsibilities herself. One evening, we sat together on my balcony. The lake was calm. Snow covered the shoreline. She held a cup of coffee. "I used to think you were stronger than everyone." I smiled. "I wasn't." "You never complained." "That was my mistake." Rebecca looked down. "I wish I had asked if you were okay." The tears returned unexpectedly. Because those simple words were all I had wanted. Not money, not gifts, not praise, only to be seen. She reached for my hand. "I see you now." And somehow, that was enough. Several months later, Susan visited. We walked beside the lake together. She smiled. "You look happy." "I am." And your family. We're learning. She laughed. Still. Probably forever. Because healing does not happen once. Families do not transform overnight. Some days remain difficult. Some conversations still hurt. Some wounds take years. But love can survive honesty. In fact, sometimes honesty is the only thing that saves it. The following spring, I finally sold the old house. Not because anyone pressured me. Not because someone needed money. Because I was ready. The decision belonged entirely to me. Before leaving for the last time, I walked through every room. The kitchen, the hallway, the bedroom, Thomas's office. Sunlight entered through the windows. Dust floated quietly in the air. I sat in his chair one final time. His letter rested in my hands. The paper had become worn, the folds softened by time. I read his words again. Please remember that your life belongs to you too. For a long time, I simply sat there. 41 years of marriage, a lifetime of memories, a man who had loved me enough to protect me, even after he was gone. I finally listened. I whispered. Outside, my children waited. Rebecca, Michael, Lauren. Not because they wanted the house, not because they needed something. They simply wanted to help me move. And that difference meant everything. As we carried the final box outside, I locked the front door. The key rested in my hand. One final key. One final goodbye. I turned toward my family. Emily had come home from college. She hugged me. Michael carried boxes. Rebecca smiled. Lauren held my painting supplies. And suddenly I realized something. I had not lost my family. I had found them again. Not as employees and employers. Not as servants and dependents. As people. As adults. As a mother and her children. That evening, I returned to my apartment by the lake. The sun was setting. Orange light stretched across the water. I placed Thomas's photograph beside my newest painting. I sat quietly. No television, no phone, no schedule, only peace. At 65 years old, I had finally retired. Not from loving my family, not from being a mother, not from caring. I retired from disappearing. And if there is one thing I want every woman listening to this story to remember, it is this. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to have dreams after 60. And you are never too old to return to the person you were always meant to become. As the last sunlight disappeared across the lake, I whispered the words that had changed my life. My name is Angelina Hayes. And for the very first time in many years, I knew exactly who she was. Sometimes the deepest exhaustion in life does not come from hard work. It comes from being needed for so long that you forget what it feels like to simply be yourself. Many mothers spend decades giving everything they have. They raise children, support husbands, solve problems, protect their families, and carry burdens nobody else can see. Little by little, their own dreams become smaller. Their needs become quieter. Their identities slowly disappear behind the words, Mom, Grandma, or Can you help me? Angelina's story reminds us that love should never require the complete loss of who we are. She did not stop loving her children. She did not stop being a mother. What she stopped doing was sacrificing herself until there was nothing left. And perhaps that is the lesson many of us need to hear. Sometimes the people we love become so comfortable receiving that they forget to ask whether we are tired. They assume we are strong because we never complain. They assume we are happy because we always say yes. But every human heart needs rest.
Every woman deserves time.
Every mother deserves to be seen. It is never too late to reclaim your life. It is never too late to set boundaries. It is never too late to discover the woman you were before the world asked you to become everything for everyone else. The greatest act of courage is not walking away from the people you love. It is returning to yourself without stopping loving them. If you are watching this and you have ever felt invisible, exhausted, or forgotten inside your own family, please remember this. Your value does not come from how much you sacrifice. Your worth does not depend on how useful you are, and your life still belongs to you. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt like Angelina? What part of her journey spoke to you the most?
And if stories like this remind you that you are not alone, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your story matters, your voice matters, and sometimes one comment can help another person feel seen for the very first time.